On today's episode, natural remedies, startup economics, and financial literacy A to Z. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited to dive into this week's episode. And help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, what's going on by you?
You know, as we were putting together this episode, I was thinking about like lessons that I would want to pass down to my kids. And I happen to be battling a case of the hiccups. And I'm going to, yeah, I know, it happens. And I realized that I have learned a secret, like a natural remedy that while it may be out there on the internet for those who know how to do really good Googling, it's one that like everyone should know and you should pass it down to your kids. And then as I was thinking in 37 years, I've actually figured out a couple of these things that, yes, there's 1,000 answer to said problem on the internet. I happen to know the best. So we're
the answer.
We're going to talk about a few other things, but I was like, I got to close the loop on this. People need to know, we have a responsibility to share the truth about these hidden secrets.
I'm somewhat frightened of what's coming next, but lay it on me.
Here they are. And I'm going to do this in ascending impressiveness. So like, I'll start with the one that is like, I would say it's like 70% effective, but with summer coming up, has anybody ever experienced brain freeze? Increased incidence of ice cream and popsicles, brain freeze, slushies, brain freeze. To get rid of brain freeze, in my 37 years of experience, I have found that the absolute best way is to take your tongue and press it against the roof of your mouth and hold it there for, whatever time is needed. But if a brain freeze in the absence of this technique would last, 5 minutes, you'll cut it in half. You'll cut it by 70%. It's truly amazing. Did you know that, Brad? Is that something you've ever tried?
That is completely brand new to me.
See, you can share this with your kids and you can save people minutes of their life. Now we're going to keep going.
Okay.
Has anybody experiencing allergies, right? Like pollen is in the air. You find yourself sneezing a lot. Have you ever been in the middle of a sneeze and then just suddenly it died? You desperately wanted to complete the sneeze. That was part of it. And it got taken away from you. I can share with you the secret to salvage and finish that sneeze every single time. Do you know this technique, Brad?
Jonathan, I have no idea. I am a prolific sneezer, unfortunately. I do have allergies, so I'm curious to hear what the punchline is.
No, there's no punchline. These are just truths. Eternal truths. Find something bright to stare at. If you have a light in your room, stare at the light. If the sun's outside, try to stare at the sun. It will force you to complete the sneeze. It works like 98% of the time.
That's interesting. I do the exact same thing, but I never thought of it in terms of the light. I just look up is how I do it. So yeah.
It is the light. The brighter it is, the more likely it is to trigger that reflex response. I bet you there's doctors in the audience that anecdotally are saying, yeah, I actually had a scientific study that passed on my desk over the last couple years.
Is any of this from your pharmacy school training or is this just life anecdote?
Oh, this is one of those things where you say of all your training you got more help by just doing lots of trial and error on Google. Because the other things they had, let's go to hiccups here. And this is probably one of the most impressive. How many times has someone had the hiccups and then someone's tried to help you by trying to scare you? It just looks like arbitrarily screaming in your face or maybe patting on your back. Or, there's 40 to 50 alternatives. Holding your breath for 20 minutes.
Yeah, that works but causes another problem.
The law of unintended consequence. This does work. All right. So it's a slight pivot on the drinking water tactic that is also pretty popular. Drink water. The key here is that you need to reset your diaphragm. It is like spasming. That's what's happening. And there was multiple people that were experiencing hiccups for years. By the way, this is a medical condition that some people have where they just hiccup for years at a time. And in this particular case, this doctor had perfected this technique where he had them. I know it's not on video, but maybe I can do a good enough job describing this where you can visualize this with me. Normally, when we drink water, we all tilt our head back, right? To open up the throat. Yeah. And, it would be normal to tilt your head back and drink the water. What you need to do in this case, and it's a little bit awkward, is keep your head tilted towards your chest. So chin down towards the chest, which puts the diaphragm in a little bit of a different position. And then drink the water that way, which requires that you tilt your whole body back a little bit. So you're drinking your water, your chin is ported toward your chest, which complicates it. But I'm telling you, every single time I have like blown people's minds, because it takes a while to convince them, because they're assuming that this suggestion is the same quality as, let me try to scare you real quick, and they don't understand. There's a doctor that says he has cured people with hiccups for like 20 years in his office with this tactic, and it forces a diaphragm reset. I'm telling you,
it's funny. Can I interrupt?
Go ahead.
If you had asked me for one of these home remedies, just in general, without you having prefaced it with anything, I would have said my kids and my wife have this amazing remedy for hiccups that I think is insane, but they say it works 100% of the time. And it's essentially what you just said with a slight twist. They actually drink kind of backwards from the cup, so they lean forward, but it's the exact same thing that you're saying. It's a reset of the diaphragm. So that's fascinating that they report 100% success within seconds. So
yes,
none of the scaring nonsense, just kind of drink in a different manner from a cup, and it works.
Look, I promise you, we're going to give some great information on the rest of this episode, but no one's going to remember any of it. It's going to be this
it's all about the hiccups.
This one technique is going to be that thing that makes you a legend at cocktail parties for decades to come.
Nice. Well done, Jonathan. Well done.
All right. So I promised natural remedies, startup economics, and financial literacy A to Z. I was watching the first couple episodes of We Crashed, now airing on Apple TV. It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. But it opens, and by the way, it is the story of WeWork, a unicorn that blew up over the last decade and then crashed in spectacular fashion. They're still around now. You can use a co-working space, and maybe the future is even bright for them to some degree. Although even as of today, I checked in 2022, they have never made a profit. So we'll come back to that in a second. Okay. At the beginning of the show, two of the investors are highlighting the plight of this startup economic. WeWork at this point in time, and basically through its whole epic tale, is hemorrhaging around $2.1 million a day. So it's not a profitable business, but far from being profitable, it is burning through $2.1 million a day. So a huge chunk of really, investors have thrown $1 billion in funding at this thing. And WeWork is systematically burning through $2.1 million every 24 hours. And
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. These two investors are talking to each other, and the one saying, well, I think they're going to figure it out, man. I think they're going to, and there's no way to figure this out. You can't. And the guy is going back immediately to the lemonade stand example. And I was like, back to basics. Here's why it doesn't work. And so then it transitions scenes, and Adam Newman is talking with his accountants, and his parties are giving him advice on what he should do. And they're basically saying, this doesn't work. It fundamentally doesn't work. The numbers don't work. You cannot spend many, many multiples of what you're making and call that a business model. And the solution, because this is the first episode, this is not the final episode, and so I'm not spoiling the whole thing for you here. The solution that the CEO in this case at this point in time comes up with is, what we need to do is we need to spend more. We need to, here's what you do. Anytime someone tells you no, we need to get 45 locations closed this year. If they tell you no, we need to offer them longer term. So your normal term is for a 5-year lease, we'll do a 20. You normally charge this amount of rent, we'll pay 2 times as much or 3 times as much. We will do anything to close the deal. It's just about closing the deal. Economics be damned. And we're going to come back to the whole financial literacy A to Z, but like the problem is in Silicon Valley, which this is a real estate company posing as a tech company, in tech world, the ethos has been grow as fast as possible and at any cost, and it will always work out. And we have all of human history and all of our own experiences and all of the basics of economics to say that for the vast, vast, vast majority of people, 99.999%, that's a recipe for economic disaster. Within the last 10 years, there have been a few companies of note, the biggest companies in the world, that have successfully gone from 20 years of running at, no profit to now being the only company in their niche. And as a result, you have the second and third generation of tech companies that are all trying to do the same and are now, most of them, imploding in spectacular fashion. And you have a generation of people who maybe have picked up the ethos of those initial blitz scale approaches And their own finances are imploding in spectacular fashion as well. Brad, we need to go back to financial literacy A to Z.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, those are such high profile examples, but ultimately, fundamentals win in the long run. They have to, by definition. I always think in terms of on a long enough timeline. That's the phrase that I throw around in my own head is on a long enough timeline, dot, dot, dot. And then I look at are things sustainable, right? So in the case of WeWork, as you're saying, 2.1 million. So that means they are burning through $750 million every year. And that money, literally, it doesn't just grow on trees. If they aren't profitable, so if they started from day zero, sure, maybe they could borrow a little bit of money, but ultimately, the profits, just like any business, the profits would have to cover the expenses, or what happens? You go bankrupt by definition. But if you can in essence, convince or sucker people into investing in your business indefinitely on the promise of growth, well, that works until it doesn't, right? Because by definition, you can't run a billion or multiple billions of dollars in the red every single year unless you just keep having money flowing in, right? So you have to get more and more money at a higher and higher valuation because the people are getting, you're diluting all the prior investors, right? So somehow or another, it eventually comes down to fundamentals, right? So a company like that would go bankrupt. And then the beautiful part about living in America is we have a bankruptcy system and someone could buy this for pennies on the dollar. And like you said, Jonathan, there might even be a thriving business out of it someday, right? If somebody, and that's what happens when any business goes out of business. So there is potentially a silver lining at the end, but there's a lot of pain for all those billions of dollars that were raised really stupidly on the promise of growth. And you see this with companies like even super successful companies. I use that in quotes, like Uber. Uber has been in the red for years and years and years, and yet they keep raising money. And obviously, we don't have the precise details now. So this is more just anecdote, but you hear this over and over again of, okay, this is a world changing company. They're growing, and all we have to do is keep getting new customers. Well, again, ultimately, on a long enough timeline, you need to be profitable. And I think, Jonathan, that's a very long preamble into financial literacy is so important. And we don't learn this in school. Most of us don't learn it from our families or parents because they were never taught. And it ultimately comes down to what I think of as almost accounting 101 or personal finance 101 is it's that income statement, right? It's the balance sheet. It's just on the income statement side, your income has to be greater than your expenses. Or on that long enough timeline, you're in deep trouble. You cannot stay solvent. So you have to figure it out. And I think that's what we do so well in the financial independence community is we try to increase that gap, right? The gap between our income and our expenses by optimizing our income, by cutting our expenses for things we don't value, and then investing wisely. And the beautiful part about personal finance and ultimately financial literacy is while it seems daunting, it's actually disarmingly simple. That's what I love about personal finance is it can be so simple, but it's couched in complexity by people who make money off of the complexity. And you know when you find that kind of jargon and complexity, you should run as far and as fast as you possibly can because I'm here to tell you I've lived 20 plus years as an adult making money, and I have yet to find one instance, literally one instance in my life, where complexity is something I'm running towards as opposed to running away from.
And Brad, to your point, the heart of this is we're not saying it's easy, but it is simple, right? And if we can focus on simple, if we can focus on systems, if we can focus on just incremental improvement and then immersing yourself in this content, it is absolutely achievable. And the key is, best time to start 20 years ago, second best time today. Let's get started. And you guys have been listening to this show for a while, so you already have gotten started. But then if we're talking about the importance of financial literacy, yes, it's for us, but it's also for our kids. It's for the next generation. It was very exciting to see that, like, I think Florida just passed a law that financial literacy is now mandatory in the school systems. And I know they're not the first state to roll this out, but this should be the case for every state in the country. I mean, this is critical. It is so much easier to have a framework going into adulting that makes sense based on some of the principles that we're going to highlight today than to try to unwind 10 or 20 years of financial mistakes to then get started with a fresh slate. What would it look like just to have these best practices going forward? Brad, it's the year is 2022, and probably this kind of move on pushing financial literacy into the school systems has really picked up some steam over the last 5 years or so. It took a long time to get here, but it's good to see that it's growing in, I guess you would say, consistency from a state to state level.
Yeah, it is nice to see. It's funny. Actually, my father-in-law just sent me a newspaper clipping in the mail about precisely that financial literacy. It's pretty neat to see it spread from state to state. And it seems like there's a big push for that. I know your wife, Danny, and an entire team of educators came up with a pre-K through 12th grade curriculum at our foundation site. So chooseafivefoundation.org. So if any teachers or parents out there are listening to this, you can actually just head over there very specifically for children. But I know we're going to talk much more broadly here, Jonathan. But it is interesting to think about, hey, if I were to go back and do this again for myself, or really in my own case, I have kids who are getting into near teenage years, right? And what do I want to teach them? When do I want to teach them? And how do I best go about doing that? And I mean, this is really top of mind for me. What are the lessons that I would pass along? Like, what are the essential things that you need to know, not just when you're 27 or 37, right? But when you're 16, before you make any decisions on college or anything that really is going to be hard to go back on, if you will.
The financial literacy as a definition, it can vary from one institute to another, but the ability to use knowledge and skills to manage one's financial resources effectively for a lifetime of financial security. At a very simple level, I like to think of that equation that we just talked about, and you highlighted it there. What you earn minus what you spend is equal to the difference, the gap, what you have available to save and invest. So at minimum, financial literacy should encompass best practices for earning income, best practices for spending the income that you make, and best practices for what to do with the difference, how to save and invest. So if you break those down into subcategories, earning, if we're thinking about this for ourselves or for others, that would include at minimum a career choice, how to pick a career, looking at ROI, looking at how much debt, how much time it's going to take to get into that career, how to really perform at that career and move up through whatever career ladder that we're on. And then in parallel to that, salary negotiation, how to make sure that we are getting paid what we are worth and that we're being valued appropriately, and skill acquisition. So there's the career track that you're on, and there's the salary that you negotiate with that career. But there's also in parallel to that you have a lifetime to be and do whatever it is that you want to do. And so to not put a respectable amount of time into skill acquisition is unnecessarily short-sighted. And so I think that, in our community, we really encourage this idea of being a lifelong learner. That is a massive piece of this. And I think if you're going to be holistic with financial literacy, it should encourage a robust approach to earning more.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's entrepreneurship, which is really important as well in terms of your career and earning more. That's something that I never would have considered when I was an 18-year-old that I would be an entrepreneur. But it was interesting. I actually just recorded an episode of the Rebel Entrepreneur podcast with Alan Donegan. And reflecting on my own story, it was astonishing just how important, or certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, entrepreneurship has been for me. But really, like you're saying, Jonathan, it's skill acquisition. It's those little things that you pick up all along the way that add to that talent stack that you have. And my own talent stack, starting from my accountant's training to starting personal finance websites to starting dropship sites that sold firewood storage racks and all these crazy things, picking up rudimentary SEO skills and HTML, all of these things, they all help and they all add together. And the beautiful thing is, like we've talked about so many times, this skill acquisition can be nearly free or free in most cases. That's the beautiful thing of YouTube and Google in this day and age, in 2022 and beyond. You can pick up essentially any skill for nearly free. And that should be extremely exciting for people because anything you want to learn, you can learn. I know that might be like an obvious statement of the year, but think about how revolutionary that is, Jonathan. Think about when we were kids, even. in our own lifetimes, and we're not that old, right? Like in the scheme of things, you couldn't do that. It didn't exist. So, I mean, that's something that's really important to remember. But in terms of earning and career choice, that goes back, like I said, again, if you're looking at this of what decisions would I make or what would I teach my kids, college or not college, that's an important part in this that you might altogether lump in debt and other aspects of financial literacy. But I think it has to do with career as well, tied directly, right? Because the decisions you make for college and or what you're going to major in tied directly into your career options and your career choices.
So it's interesting, Brad. As we say all those, I hope people that have been with us for a long time are immediately thinking potentially of other times that we've hit on just, these topics. And for those that are maybe listening to this episode for the first time and haven't heard any of our archives, any of our older episodes, they're thinking, well, okay, sounds good. I want to look into those. Brad, we've been recording this show for like over 5 years now. Like we're going into year 6. There are a lot of episodes in our archives. And just trust me when I say, if we're talking about it on the show, we have covered this information comprehensively, and I think in a way that will add value to your life. We were thinking as we were going to put this together, financial literacy A to Z. If we're saying this is financial literacy A to Z, wouldn't it be cool to bring together any content, the best of the content that we've made as it applies to these financial literacy pillars and put them together in one place for you. And I think about it more as like a living, breathing document where you can always count on the fact that long term, this single place would be the springboard for how our content aligns with financial literacy goals.
Yeah, I love that. And as we've talked about in the past, we always try to find those landing places for people. If they're looking to get started with Choosify or financial independence or financial literacy, whatever it may be, choosify.com/start is always going to be a good one. You can always get on my email list at choosify.com/subscribe. But I think this one, choosify.com/A2Z, and we're going to set it up both ways. So A, the number 2Z or ATOZ. So either way, you don't have to remember. But that will be what I hope to be the living, breathing article of everything financial independence. So financial independence and financial literacy, A to Z. And obviously, that's a massive undertaking, right, Jonathan? So our team has created this. You and I have helped work on this. This is not its finished product right now, but it's in really, really good shape as a starting point. And what I'm excited about is as we learn new things or as we create new resources ourselves or find amazing resources elsewhere on the internet, even down to minutia, right? How to do the Roth IRA conversion ladder. That's something that is not going to be applicable to somebody starting on day one of financial literacy or even financial independence. Obviously not. But there are many people in our community that could benefit from that. So we're going to either create our own resource for that or we're going to link to the best resource on the internet. So that's kind of how I see this page. I see that page becoming the centerpiece of the entire choosify.com website.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choosify team. Hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
So we're going to work through these. We just did earn. We just talked through a few of those. If you want to do a deep dive in any one of these topics, you will be able to quickly go to that section and then use some of the resources that we provided as a springboard to look into salary negotiation, to look into skill acquisition, to look into, career choice and some of those resources. And I think about it the same way that I think of the cure for hiccups. This is something that the sooner you have it, the more powerful it is. So like, how quickly can you get this into your kids' hands? There's so many people that are doing alternative forms of schooling, whether their school is actually an alternative type of school or whether or not they're homeschooling on top of what they're getting. If you want your kids to get into this type of content faster, it's free. We created this foundation and piloted this financial literacy curriculum for the goal of getting these concepts, working them all the way down. If you think about it this way, as a high school graduate, I want them to have these competencies. How does that translate back into 8th grade, into 5th grade, into 4th grade, into kindergarten, into pre-kindergarten? So, if you have an independent school, you have some control over the type of content that's in your school. I'd highly encourage you to take a look at this. It's free. Reach out to us if you have questions. If you're a parent that wants to have some additional resources to offer your kid to kind of help them implement these ideas and these principles as they grow at age appropriate levels, this curriculum is free as well. So you can go to our foundation and check that out, or we'll have it linked up in this article, Financial Literacy A to Z, as well. So when we go to the next category, spend, what you earn minus what you spend, The competencies that immediately come to my mind is, do you know how to track your budget? Just last week we were talking to Joe Saul, talking about the difference between tracking and budgeting. Both are important for different reasons. Tracking, here's what happened. And then budgeting, a very powerful skill. Here's what I want my money to do. And then checking to see the following month using tracking, did what I want to do actually happen? Right. And then you can course correct or make adjustments around that. And then finally, we're talking about spending here. So this is how I track my spending, how I budget my spending. How do I optimize my spending, Brad? If you really think about it, this is a place in the FI community where we really made some inroads compared to maybe what you would hear in kind of generic personal finance circles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this ties into the larger issue that really encompasses both earning and spending, which is savings rate, right? To me, that is the starting point for your financial independence life. And I think that's something we've hit on very early is increasing your savings rate is a function, very obviously, of those two things, right? But it's the critical piece. And that's, if you ask me what's one piece of advice I would pass along to my kids, it's essentially, if you have a 50% savings rate, it's almost impossible to screw up your financial life. So that should be kind of the guiding light from day one is before you've made mistakes, before you've incurred massive debt or gotten a huge car loan or a mortgage you theoretically can afford but really can't, can you optimize for a 50% savings rate? And sure, that might be pie in the sky for some people, but even if you get a 30% savings rate, a 25%, it's so much better than, Jonathan, like you said, the traditional personal finance advice is, oh, if you save 10% of your income, you are in the top 10th of a percent of people, right? Like you are so far ahead of the game if you save 10%. Well, sure, that's better than saving zero or going into debt every month. But if you align yourself to a massive savings rate, you really, like I said, you really can't screw up your financial life. And to your actual question, Jonathan, your expenses, optimizing your expenses. How do you do that? Like I do this. My wife and I, we look at personal finance as this kind of fun game that we get to play together. And it's how do we live the same middle or upper middle class life as everybody around us and still have that 40, 50, 60% savings rate? To me, that's the fun part of this. So that means how can I optimize expenses in ways that don't deprive me in any manner? Because that is a critical piece also, is whenever you get into a deprivation mindset or a short-term mindset, right? Like this is just a financial diet. This is a finite period of time. I'm going to go on a budget and reach this goal and then all hell breaks loose, right? I'll just go back to normal. Well, I don't think that that's successful. I think this needs to be a long-term mindset. And that's another important piece of just the overall financial literacy is how do you think long-term? But even Jonathan, little examples because they help, right? A lot of people, even today, spend $80 to $100 a month on their cell phone. And we in the financial independence community have looked at that expense and said, we can do this a little bit smarter. And I know this is one tiny little example, and this in and of itself is not going to get you to FI or the perfection for financial literacy, but it's important because the little things matter, right? So there are companies like Republic Wireless or Mint Mobile where you can get unlimited Wi-Fi phone and a certain amount of data, right? I think Mint Mobile actually might even be unlimited data at this point, but these are roughly $20 a month, $25 a month, 15 even on the lower level Republic Wireless phones. And what does it require? It requires a tiny little change in your mindset. So for me, it's very simply when I'm out of Wi-Fi, when I'm not at home, I just don't stream Netflix or download podcasts. That's it. That is the only thing that I change. But yet, that allows me to have a $20 cell phone bill as opposed to a $100 cell phone bill. That's per month, right? That's $80 a month times 12. That's almost $1,000 a year for one decision on one phone line. So it's, can you be a little bit smarter?
This is such a tiny thing around that, but using the approach that you're talking about, you need to be a little bit, you're trying to be a little bit more intentional around your data. And this is so funny. And I don't know if anybody else does this, but I just wrapped my mind around this within the last couple of months. So I'm going to share it because it's, it's my show and I get to go on sidebars. All right. I just realized that if you do not want to use data and your phone doesn't prioritize using data versus not using data. It just prioritizes your connection. You can actually go onto your phone and you can tell it, like if I try to spend a lot of time in the garage or outside around my house, but not in my house. And I'm trying to either use data that's already on my phone or I'm trying to use a Wi-Fi signal that's going in and out. What I don't want to do is for my phone to make the decision that my Wi-Fi signal is spotty and then to always try to go to LTE, which charges me. You can just quickly, when you're in this scenario, go in and turn off LTE. And then your phone will work harder to preserve the Wi-Fi signal. It won't bail on it at like 30 or 40% capacity because the LTE is stronger. It will like only use that or nothing. And I've noticed like I need to get my wife to like use this technique as well, because sometimes I feel like my data is creeping up unnecessarily. We work from home. We live at home. Whenever you like go to stream something, it caches it on your phone. There's no reason, so it requires maybe retraining a couple different things, but you're talking about saving, 60, $70 a month if you can just implement these best practices. A tiny little thing. I don't know if you've ever done
Yeah.
that or if anybody else ever done that. I realized, oh, that's a real thing. I should be doing that because Google Fi isn't watching my back on how much data I'm using.
Right. No, that is really cool because that actually does happen to me at home when I'm just a little bit too far away from the router, and yeah, it zips back and forth. So that's actually very cool. But like you said, these little things, they can add up. And we talk about things like meals, right? Meal planning. How can you be just a little more intentional? And we're not going to get bogged down in the minutia of every single one of these, but Jonathan, you use that word intentional. And I think that's the critical piece when it comes to spending. It's so easy to let your spending get away from you. And then you let your budget get away from you. You let your long-term plans get away from you. You let your savings rate get away from you. And if you can just be intentional and think long-term, then all of these little micro decisions just kind of solve themselves, right? And again, meal planning is one that to me, it's such the low-hanging fruit of personal finance because it's a massive amount of money that a lot of people spend on their food every month. And if you're just a little bit intentional, if you plan your meals for that week, if you don't just, hey, it's 5:45 and we have no idea where we're eating tonight, let's go out to eat. And then it's $50, $75, right? Like that kind of thing is very, very easy to get away from you. So can you be intentional? Can you be intentional about your car purchases? Those kind of things, they add up. Driving old cars, just that one decision can be almost $1 million decision over an investing
And
lifetime,
someone's like,
right?
wait, what? How is that? How is that $1 million
Yeah.
decision? And we've done the math on that. That's proven out multiple times. And Brad, I'm sure you could even point them to an episode, or we can link it in the article, choosefi.com/A to Z. So instead of you memorizing all these special links, go to the article. Everything we're talking about today will be linked there, choosefi.com/A to Z.
Yeah, I love it. And to me, the last piece that I'd like to put in here to spending is around automating. I think this is a broader concept that again, if you were asking me what's financial literacy that I'd like to pass along to my children, automating your finances is such an important piece. And it doesn't fit nicely into any of these 5 boxes, but it's that umbrella that's so important. And how can you automate your finances? How can you take your brain out of it? Because I know my brain screws me up. We've talked to even experts like Brandon from the Mad Scientist, who has said how, while sure, he'd love to have everything on autopilot and it just be obvious, he still gets caught up in superstition of not investing when the stock market's down or some kind of craziness of like his hockey jersey numbers and some wild stuff because we're human. And that's just the way our brains work. So, how can you take your brain as much out of this process as possible and automate everything? So then there are all these add on effects, right? When you automate, again, you take your brain out of it, but you don't have to stress so much because everything you've created a system one time. You front loaded the sacrifice by putting in that work that one time to automate all your payments, to send your money for investments on certain days of the month, and to automatically invest regardless of whether the market's up or down. And when that all happens in the background, you don't have to worry about your personal finances anymore. It just happens. And I can say personally, I'm a born worrier, I guess, let's say. It has made my life so much better to automate as much as humanly possible.
Well, I think that what's going to become pretty clear as you go through these is that as you you never finish one category. In fact, as you start to increase your acumen at another category, it actually informs and helps you make better decisions in a prior category. As you start to realize, all right, I really want to focus on a 50% savings rate, that leads to two things. One, the sooner I'm earning, the better. Two, the more debt that I incur to get that career, the harder it is for me to hit that 50% savings rate. And the longer it takes to get into that career, the longer before I'm really going to amplify that savings rate as well. None of these are happening in a silo. The information that's produced by one informs what you're able to do in another. When you automate your finances, you free up more time for skill acquisition. I think about these people that used to spend, a week a month working on managing all their finances for, that month. And I was like, oh my, that's so stressful. No, don't do that. But as you get to this third kind of category, so we've gone through earn, we've gone through spend, and now we're talking about saving and investing. At the end, any sort of comprehensive financial literacy program would need to give you comfort with what would, in some spaces seem like complexity, the different account types, the various tax treatments, general investing strategies. And then what should bind all those, regardless of what you approach, is you should be looking at, how can I automate this? I don't want to have to make decisions to do this. I want to decide what my best practices is going to be and then do that consistently every month. You need to have a long-term mindset, right? Make a thesis, stick with it. You want to avoid fees. Fees are guaranteed loss, right? So we want to look for low-cost approaches with our investing strategies, and generally buy and hold goes hand in hand with a long-term mindset. We don't want to buy things that we think are going to be bad deals next month, right? That we're going to want to unwind. We don't want to have to try to figure out exactly what's going on in the world at any particular point in time and get in, get out, because we're going to make mistakes. And other people that have more information than us are getting in ahead of us and getting out before us. And it just, over time, success in that regards of timing things will breed failure, as opposed to, you don't need to agree with everything that we're saying one-to-one, but if you have a belief about something, a long-term belief will more likely produce fruit than a short-term, 30-day or 10-day belief, a one-quarter belief, like, no, get in here, get out there. You're going to screw it up. And if you get lucky one time, you're more likely to double down and get screwed up later. Have a long-term investing strategy, and that will pay dividends. Ooh, pun kind of intended.
kind of intended.
Yeah, love it. Love it.
No, but it's very, very important, that mindset. As you said, not a monthly mindset or a quarterly mindset, but a decades long mindset. And I think that really does change how you think about your investments, how you think about investing just generally. And I think for me, while we don't give financial advice on this podcast, we can talk about how we think about investing. And as we've discussed with Brian Feraldi recently, I don't think about investing in the stock market as just some random, nebulous, monolithic thing or something that is uncertain to me. It's every time I invest, I am becoming an owner of a company or companies. And just that one little mindset shift has made a huge difference for me, because growing up, again, without having financial literacy, without having people to teach me this, I remember these little anecdotes of my dad got a stock tip, from the guy in the office next to him, and, oh, buy Verizon stock. And I mean, he didn't know anything about this. He bought Verizon stock. Of course, it crashed. And that was the lesson that I learned, is investing in the stock market is risky. It's akin to gambling, right? You could just go to a casino and bet on the number 4 in roulette or something. That was the lesson that my 12-year-old brain got. But now that I understand, the stock market is not a gambling machine. The stock market allows you the opportunity to become an owner of a company, or again, many companies. In the case of an index fund, right? Something that I invest in personally is the total stock market index fund. Every time you put money in there, you become a tiny little owner of 4,000 plus companies. And some of those companies are going to fail. Some are going to succeed wildly. And the index is self-cleansing. So that's pretty cool. That's a methodology that I like. But again, Brian Feraldi talks about investing in individual stocks, which you can do if you want to put the time in, you want to put the research in, you want to understand how that particular company works. So that's more obviously of a eggs, not in one basket, because you would buy multiple companies, but all of your eggs in, let's say, 20, 30, 50 baskets of companies that you have a high conviction in. And you want to be an owner of those companies. Again, that one little mindset shift makes a huge difference.
Right. And you set up the perfect example there, because the problem, I think probably all of us at one point or another have either given a stock tip or been on the other side and received a stock tip. And always, when you get a tip, it's about a company that you probably have never heard of or didn't care about prior. You are gambling because the tip was you're going to make a bunch of money in a relatively short amount of time if you quickly move some assets from here to there, right? And that usually comes with some sort of letdown on the other side. You realize that, you got suckered, you've been had, it didn't work, and then you move your money out. So you bought high and sold low. Whereas if you can make the shift really to Brian for all these mindset, whether you're talking about an index, you're talking about an individual company, maybe you do get a tip. Like, for instance, let's use your dad's example. Verizon is a great company with a great outlook. Let's say that someone gave your dad a tip about, and he heard about this company for the first time, Verizon. And instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to try and make some money in the quarter, he does some research and he sees that the long-term outlook for Verizon is that they're probably going to become one out of three cell phone providers that are going to, make it at this tier inside the United States, that they are going to become the primary Wi-Fi provider inside the United States, that their lightning speed Fios is whatever, that as cable dies, all of entertainment is going to be basically, on the back of the infrastructure that Verizon's building, that they're getting contracts with the government that are worth X crazy amount, and that they're only being, he gets these fundamentals. Says, can you imagine where they're going to be in 10 years? I don't care what the price does it. So what happens? In this case, your dad now has a 10-year mindset around the future of Verizon. Verizon crashes 90%, and your dad is like, it's on sale because I have a 10-year future, and he is rewarded immensely for that. And you guys are like, well, did that happen? I don't know, but I do know what happened with Amazon. I know what happened with Amazon. Amazon in 2001 crashed by 90%, or after the dot-com bubble, it crashed by 90%. The individuals that got a stock tip about Amazon were forever bitter on Amazon. The individual, because there's a reason it crashed 90%. Everybody was trying to get out because they thought they were supposed to make an unlimited amount of money. So everybody was trying to get out before everybody else. The individuals that said, I wonder what the future is of a company centralizing all of the old retail space into one place. I wonder what the growth potential is of that company investing when it was 90% off, are now all millionaires, right? Like all of them. The individuals that were investing through that downturn have been rewarded by tens of thousands of percent return. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. The mindset is key. The actual vessel, index fund or otherwise, has to do with how much research do you want to do, likely, and will be a better predictor on average, because you're not always going to get this right. But the mindset you have is your superpower, let alone the savings rate. I don't think in the short term. I have a thesis. Could the thesis change? Absolutely. It could change, but it's not changed about the price over any particular period of time.
Yeah, Jonathan, that is such an interesting point, and I never even considered this with this stupid Verizon story that I've said a couple times now on the podcast. It's about long term thinking. I'd be curious because again, this was a story from when I was a little kid.
Can you
I don't know
imagine,
any,
even if you invested at the top as a little kid, what it would be worth today?
or my dad,
Yeah.
right? That's really the example at hand, which is what if he had just held? What would that be worth today? I'd never run the numbers because again, I was a little kid. I don't know any of the details. This thing the crash might have been 5% and he got scared and he sold for all I know. But it was a story in our house. And that was enough because that was the financial literacy in my house around investing in the stock market. And it was scary, right? But in this case, it would be cool if I could go back and somehow recreate when he bought this, what he spent, and what it would be worth today at a minimum 25, probably 30 plus years down the road. I'd be fascinated. How cool
Dude,
would that
do
be?
it. You may not be able to get it exact, but I guarantee you could get us close enough to have a story around this.
Yeah, I'll talk to my mom and see if she can dig up any of the records on this. But yeah, that would be really cool. Because again, if you're not thinking in terms of what is this going to do for me next month, but you're investing like you painted that beautiful picture of this company that has thrived over the last decades, what would it be worth? What would that investment have been worth to them today? So to be continued, certainly. But it's an important mental framework for this entire concept that we're giving here, right? In terms of how do you think about investing? And really, the way that we believe you should think about investing is over a very long time period, as long of a time period as you ultimately have.
This is the criteria that I would use for anything that I'm going to put my money in. Is this something that I'm willing to hold for 10 years, no matter what? Like if you're thinking you're going to have to get out at a select time, that already tells you what the long-term future is for this in your own mindset. You have no real faith in where this is going. So like, it's a long-term mindset. A buy and hold mindset will get rid of 90% of the investing mistakes that individuals make. All right, moving on through these categories. So earn, spend, and save. These are the ones that are kind of obvious. And Brad, I know you pulled this up and it complements nicely what we're talking about here. According to the Financial Literacy and Economic Commission, there's actually 5 key components of financial literacy. And we're not going to rob you guys of the last 2. And we weren't surprised to see what they were. Brad, what are they?
Yeah, so the last 2 are borrow and protect. So borrow is something that's really critical. And I think a lot of people do think about in terms of personal finance, right? It's the different types of debt, all those different from the very beginning, what's good debt and bad debt, quote unquote. That's something that people look at. And whether we agree with it or not is a separate issue. And we can talk about the nuance certainly here and in this article. But people think of good debt as mortgage debt, or potentially college debt, student loans. Whereas contrasting with bad debt, very obviously being something like credit card debt or payday loans, something with an enormous interest rate. So again, going back to financial literacy 101 is, okay, just understanding your debt. What's the term? How do I have to pay this off? What happens if I can't pay? Or what happens if, is there forbearance? There are all these things on student loans. There are ways to potentially pause them for a time period. And again, this is not the venue necessarily to talk about all the minutia and the detail, but the critical part is understanding your debt, right? Understanding when you sign a contract for a loan, you are literally signing a legally binding contract that you need to be aware of. It's important and it's essential for you to understand what are the terms. So literally the term is the length of time, but the interest rate is critical. How do you pay this thing back? When you look at a credit card for the very first time and you see minimum payment and it's this small amount and you're doing cartwheels that, oh, wow, I only have to pay them $21 this month. That's amazing. Well, if you had learned about credit cards, you'd understand you're getting hit with a 20, 25, 30% annual interest rate, and compounding is working against you there. And Jonathan, compound interest is an essential part of financial literacy, right?
Compound interest and the power of compounding, it's going to weave through all of these pillars, all of these components of financial literacy. You're going to see it, show up everywhere. But you're right, it can work for you. It can absolutely work against you. In terms of types of debt, the whole good debt, the bad debt thing, I think thinking about it through the lens of ROI is really, really critical here. What's the ROI of having a 20% credit card payment hanging over your head for, the rest of your life when, you could pay it off and not have that at all? You could decrease how much your life actually costs and these recurring things that aren't going to anything. You can't invest that money. It's due to these various companies. Let's get rid of that type of debt. I think, when you go to student loan debt, this is one that, Brad, you obviously kind of caveated as you were saying, and, we all have different feelings on this, but I think we need to be very cynical on student loan debt. First of all, don't contrast that with anyone saying that investing in yourself is a bad idea. It's a very good idea. But just because we're saying investing in yourself is a good idea does not mean it's a good idea to take out 6 figures of student loan debt and indenture yourself for 10 years to paying this off for a degree that you and a career that you may or may not like. We need to now once we understand the types of debt and what it will mean to pay that back, now we need to go back to our career choice and say, is it worth it for something that I've never done before when I could do anything? Is it worth it to attach myself to that track that I can't get out of? And then you get into interesting situations when you're talking about student loan debt with the political environment being as wishy-washy as it is right now. Do I even need to pay it back if it's a public loan? We're in this really weird place where people have taken out hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, public loans for really advanced programs. And right now, the current administration has put a pause on all payments. So great. You don't need to make these payments on these loans and some of these programs if it's a public loan, which sounds good. But these people are in a state of effectively purgatory, to borrow the word. Are they going to have to pay it back in the future? Is it something they have to never worry about again? Well, you got to work with the best information that you have at the time at hand, but we're on the front end. We don't want to give up control of our life to a political body that changes their mind every session, right? Their fate of what they're going to have to pay or not pay are in other people's hands who don't really care a whole lot about them, aren't thinking about their exact situation. So right now, when you're making a decision for your life, you don't want to cede that control. You want to control as much of your financial future as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to not owe people stuff, right? It comes down to that. So that's just a thought on borrow. And I think when you get to borrow, you definitely want to go back and pair that with career. But it, just kind of round that out from my perspective as well.
Yeah, and I like that certainly control what you can control and not ceding any aspect of your life or your financial life to some elusive they or something that can change.
Yeah, you have to use they for a lot of these conversations, don't you? Like I don't know who that point person is, but it's
right,
they.
who that they is. But it even comes down to you making decisions where you don't have certainty, right? We saw a lot of this in the 2007-8 crash where a lot of people had adjustable rate mortgages. And at some point in 3 or 5 years at the end of that term, they were going to get hit with a balloon payment on their mortgage that many people couldn't pay. And it was just because, okay, you weren't thinking in terms, again, it goes back to long-term thinking. So if you're not thinking long-term and you're just thinking this is a quick way to make a buck, well, again, going back to the very beginning of our episode here with WeWork and potentially Uber, it's great to think, okay, I can get rich quick, but then what happens when either the funding stops or in this case, the balloon payment comes and you can't pay it? That's a catastrophe. So it's just really important to think long term. So just the final thing I have here for borrow would be repayment strategies. So this is generally looked at, there's some nuance to this, but the debt snowball versus the debt avalanche. And this is for people who have a number of different outstanding debts, different interest rates, different terms, different amounts. And it's how you look at how can I pay these off? We have an article about this linked on that A to Z, but debt snowball, Jonathan, is where you pay your smallest balances first and you pay those off. And then you snowball that amount you are paying to that small balance to the next biggest one and you pay it off. And there's that huge psychological satisfaction of just getting rid of that debt and moving on to the next one. You start small. So again, you accrue those wins versus the avalanche is looking more at the interest rate. So this is more the mathematical version of it. And you want to pay down your highest interest rate debt first. So it's just a real, very high level compare and contrast. But again, this is important if you're someone who, we're not talking to a 15-year-old here, we're talking to a 25-year-old or a 55-year-old who has debt and wants to consider, how do I start paying this off? Well, looking into these different options, there's a hybrid method as well, but looking into those options, that's really, really important.
So, again, we've mentioned so many ideas. And again, think about this as a springboard. We have put all of the links to go farther on this article. You can find it at choosify.com/A to Z. A couple things that popped out to me as we were going through the section on that article. We talk about, emergency funds 101, how to save $1,000 in 30 days, the ultimate guide to paying off debt, debt 101, how to get out of debt, what to do after your debt, how to crush your grocery bill, the true cost of car ownership, the longest lasting cars on the road today. Look, I'm telling you, I think people right now get it. The best thing you can do is buy a car and drive it for a long time. More now than ever, having a car that you're not going to be swapping out is critical. This has been an eternal truth. But then when the tide goes out and car supply is looking a little crazy like it is right now, you realize it. And when you get to the last category, this was protect, right? And this is the boring stuff, but it's the important stuff. Hope for the best, protect against the worst. And that has to do with insurance products. And let me tell you, if you just go in blindly, not all insurance is created equal and not all insurance is valuable. Well, it's valuable. It just might not be valuable for you, right? So how do you optimize what you're spending on insurance to protect your loved ones? This isn't you. Insurance is boring, especially if you're talking about life insurance. It's boring. It's to, in that case, benefit those that outlive you. And so you want to get something that will protect them, but you don't want to overpay for that. And there's best practices involved. And then what's your legacy, right? This can be, obviously everybody says, hey, get a will. And that's great advice. But even more than that, what happens if you get injured? Or what happens if you're not able to communicate what needs to happen in a certain environment? Who can come behind you? And that's why we talk about the legacy binder as well. So, all right, we have covered so many topics. I mean, we've covered natural remedies, we've covered startup economics, and we've covered financial literacy to A to Z. I think we delivered. And I would encourage you to take action this week, make it your one thing, bookmark this page, go to choosify.com/A to Z. And if someone else is needing some help with financial literacy, use this as a springboard, whether it's educating your kids on financial literacy or you doing a deep dive in any of the topics. This will be a wonderful starting place and stopping place for that journey. And, as it's a nice little nod to the fact that April, if you're listening to it in the month of April, is actually Financial Literacy Month. So it's very timely. I feel like, Brad, we're actually operating in a proactive way here.
Yeah, it's nice to be ahead of the game for once. This is all due to our team, so thanks to them for coming up with this idea. But it's very timely and it's very, very important. And I'm excited that this exists. And like we said, this article will continue to be updated, and I hope that it becomes the center of our whole site. So definitely living and breathing for years to come.
All right, my friends, choosify.com/A to Z. The fire is spreading, my friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.